I think just the qualities that are essential for somebody in a leadership role. I think it's important to roll with the right characteristics and the right qualities, and I think she's exemplified that in everything she's done.
When Prince William quietly hired a humble maid to tend to Kensington Palace, no one expected their bond to become a hidden tale of kindness and compassion. She served with grace, never asking for more, until tragedy struck. But what happened next left her grieving family utterly speechless. As they uncovered the prince's secret gesture, emotions surged and tears flowed uncontrollably. So, what exactly did Prince William do behind palace walls that stunned everyone who knew her? This untold royal story is one that will touch your heart and leave you breathless. The quiet grace of Edith Turner. Before anyone whispered her name through palace halls, before any royal carriage ever passed her by, Edith Turner belonged to the unnoticed corners of life, where survival wasn't loud, but determined and deeply rooted. Born in 1952 near Sheffield, in a soot-streaked town where factory smoke clung to laundry lines and hope often arrived late, Edith grew up in a home shaped more by necessity than comfort. Her mother scrubbed floors before sunrise. Her father returned from steel mills with weary hands and silent eyes. And then, at 12, a cruel twist: her mother's sudden death. Overnight, Edith was no longer a child. She became cook, cleaner, caretaker, and confidant to 4 younger siblings and a father who mourned in stillness. She left school by 16, not from failure, but from duty, exchanging lessons for laundry buckets and school books for mop handles. She cleaned houses where no one knew her story, only her silence and efficiency. She ironed every collar with care, not because she had to, but because she believed even small things deserved dignity. Her life moved in quiet service to others, unnoticed by the world yet heavy with purpose. In her 20s, she bore a daughter, Jane, alone but unshaken. The father vanished into the blur of yesterday, but Edith pressed forward. There was no room for self-pity, only school shoes to buy, bedtime stories to tell, and curtains to stitch before sunrise. Her life, though framed by routine, was rich with quiet meaning. No one saw a future stretching beyond the next paycheck or rent due, but hidden beneath her humble rhythm was a calm that drew people in, a presence so steady it could silence storms. She didn't seek the palace found her. But what secret strength did Edith hold that even royalty was about to admire? Stay glued to your screen to uncover the truth. The letter that stirred silence. But even grace like hers cannot remain hidden forever, not when fate has other plans. It began with an envelope, thick, cream-colored, and crowned with a royal seal, tucked unassumingly between junk mail and unpaid bills. Edith Turner, now in her late 60s, held it as if it might disappear, her hands rough from decades of labor pausing on the elegant script that bore her name in rich, flowing ink. Her daughter Jane stood frozen in the kitchen, kettle boiling behind her, whispering, "Mum, is this real?" The note inside was brief. No flourish, no explanation. Just a direct summons to join the Kensington Palace household as live-in staff. Immediate start. No signature from the prince, no reason given. But it was real. It was sealed. And it was personal. She hadn't met Prince William, though she'd interviewed more than once. The silence that followed those meetings had only deepened her doubt. So why her? Why now? Jane asked the same, her voice a mixture of awe and confusion. But Edith, though stunned, said nothing. She only nodded, slowly. 2 mornings later, she stood quietly in her modest bedroom, folding old sweaters with the same gentle care she'd shown to others all her life. Then, almost ceremoniously, she retrieved a weathered wooden box from beneath her wardrobe. A box full of memories, perhaps, or letters never sent. She wrapped it in a scarf and placed it softly into her suitcase. As the taxi rolled away from the curb, her small brick house slipped from view. She didn't glance back. There was no need. What lay ahead wasn't something she could have asked for. It was something that had been quietly waiting for her. And though the palace had known titles and gold, what arrived that day was something richer. Edith Turner, carrying more dignity than anyone expected. But what unexpected dignity did Edith Turner bring to the palace that day? Stay glued to your screen to find out. When the palace doors opened, the car hummed softly as it rolled through the gates of Kensington Palace, but Edith's mind was louder, racing, doubting, reaching for reasons this could all be a mistake. Just days before, her life had been filled with routine, grocery lists, folded linens, and forgotten dreams. Now, she sat in the back seat of a royal vehicle, hands knotted in her lap as the gravel crunched beneath them, and the palace rose ahead like something from a dream. Her modest navy skirt and crisp blouse suddenly felt too plain for the world she was entering. A liveried butler greeted her with a quiet nod. No paparazzi, no pageantry. Miss Turner, His Royal Highness is aware of your arrival. She nodded back, unsure if she was breathing. Inside, the air held history. Tall windows let in delicate spring light, and oil paintings lined the walls with expressions too old to read. The floors gleamed underfoot, yet the silence wasn't cold. It was expectant. Her room was small but bright, with a view of trimmed hedges and daffodils in bloom. But every detail felt chosen with care, as if the room itself had been waiting for her. And then, the next morning, without ceremony or warning, she met him, Prince William, walking the hallway alone, sleeves casually rolled, his shoes scuffed at the edges. No crown, no entourage, just a quiet man with kind eyes. "You must be Edith," he said warmly, offering a hand. "We're glad you're here." And in that moment, it was clear. She hadn't been picked for status or service. She'd been seen somehow for who she was, and in a place filled with grandeur, that recognition was the most extraordinary thing of all. The quiet thread, holding the palace together. He didn't stay long, just a few seconds of casual kindness, but once Prince William turned the corner and vanished from sight, Edith lingered, rooted by the quiet strength of the moment. There had been no grand introduction, no ceremony, just a simple greeting from a man who seemed far more grounded than the world outside those palace walls believed. And from that moment, something shifted. The palace, with its towering halls and golden silence, seemed to breathe around her. Edith never sought attention, and yet people noticed her. She didn't rush, didn't hover, and never waited to be praised. Instead, she moved like part of the palace itself, subtle, essential, and often unseen. If someone left a room in haste, she'd sense the energy and return later with a warm cup of tea. If a young aide looked burdened, she'd gently smooth their shoulder as she passed, never saying a word. It was never about the task, it was the intention. The staff had a name for her, though never one spoken to her face: the quiet compass. Whenever tempers flared or tension thickened like London fog, someone would murmur, "Where's Edith?" as if her very presence steadied the floor beneath them. She didn't just tidy rooms, she calmed atmospheres. Though Kensington Palace was a place of ceremony and duty, Edith had her own rhythm. Mornings began before sunrise, and she would glide through the corridors, setting things right without being asked. No one gave her lists or instructions. She simply knew. The media may have been fixated on royal engagements and headlines in early 2021, but inside those ivy-draped walls, it was Edith who carried an invisible thread that kept the household quietly humming. And every evening, she returned to her small room with its lavender-scented sheets and narrow bed. There, by the window overlooking the garden, she would sit with a plain notebook and write a single page. Never more, never less. No one knew what the pages held, not even William, who had started to pause in hallways just to ask how she was doing. One evening, as the moonlight shimmered across the quiet fountain outside, she held her pen above the paper and murmured, "Stillness isn't emptiness, it's listening." Then, gently, she closed the notebook. She turned off the lamp, and before anyone realized when it began, the entire palace was already listening with her, even Prince William. Stay tuned to find out the details. Prince William shares his grief with Edith. It was sometime after that strange moonlit night that something shifted, not in the palace walls, but in the air between them. The kind of change that doesn't make a sound but lingers in the way someone pauses longer in the hallway. Or how a prince, so used to ceremony, starts showing up where no one expects him. Prince William hadn't planned to find comfort in the company of someone like Edith. She was just there, always nearby, arranging flowers, sorting books, gently adjusting a cushion without fanfare. Her presence asked nothing, demanded nothing, and perhaps that's why people, especially him, found themselves drawn to it. He first noticed her not during the grand events, but in the quiet. In the staff kitchen late one evening, where the lighting buzzed faintly and the mugs didn't match, she handed him a cup of tea with a nod, as if they'd done this 100 times. At first, he said little. He didn't have to. Edith had a way of listening that didn't feel like eavesdropping. She never leaned forward or tilted her head dramatically, just stayed still, eyes kind, hands always busy. When William finally spoke, his voice low and worn from the day, he didn't talk about policy or duty. He spoke of exhaustion, of expectations layered on since childhood. He spoke about being watched constantly, yet feeling invisible, about a mother whose memory still lived in every room, every whisper. She didn't say her name. She didn't have to. "I don't usually talk like this," he said one night after a long silence, surprised by his own openness. "You don't need to," she replied softly, barely louder than the ticking clock behind her. From then on, these unscheduled moments became part of their quiet routine. After a tense meeting or a public engagement, he might find her dusting books in a forgotten corridor or folding linens no one noticed. And somehow, he always stayed. Sometimes he'd talk, sometimes not. But in that stillness, something unspoken passed between them. One evening, he told her, "You remind me of her sometimes." His voice carried the weight of a memory too deep to explain. "I'm honored," Edith whispered, eyes lowered. She never sought recognition, but in those small, hidden corners of the palace, she offered what no title could: space to breathe, to feel, to simply be. The quiet meant for her. Long after the palace had folded into its usual nighttime hush, with corridors dim and servants gone to rest, William stood just beyond the glow of the small kitchen, where Edith moved softly, drying her hands. It wasn't the first time he found her there, but this time he carried something more fragile than words. "Do you think the dead ever reach out to us?" he asked, not quite facing her. She paused, her expression calm. "Only if we're still enough to notice." He stepped forward and gently laid a folded piece of paper on the table. Its edges were worn. The ink faded with time. "I've had this since 1997, he said quietly. "No one else has seen it, not even Harry." The letter wasn't addressed to anyone by name, just an idea. "To the one who will stand beside my sons when I can't." It was his mother's handwriting, unmistakable in its grace and emotion. Diana's words were filled with worry and hope, almost as if she had known she wouldn't be around to shield them forever. She didn't ask for someone powerful or noble. She asked for someone kind, someone who would see her boys beyond the crown.
And it wasn't a difficult decision in the end. It's what I wanted. It's what I want.
Who would be there when the noise of the world grew unbearable. Edith didn't reach for the letter. She simply listened, like always. "I used to think it was written for someone else," William said. "A teacher, maybe, or someone she had never met. But lately," he glanced at Edith, his voice faltering, "I'm starting to believe she was hoping for someone just like you." There was no grand reaction, no tears, just a quiet stillness, a shared understanding. The room felt as though it held its breath with them. Without a word, Edith poured him another cup of tea and pushed it gently toward him. "We'll keep listening," she said, voice barely above the steam rising between them. And for the first time in years, something long lost didn't feel so far away. The silence Edith left behind. Later that night, in the stillness of her room, Edith sat at her small desk, the soft patter of rain drawing delicate lines down the window pane. Her notebook lay open, pages half filled with careful handwriting. She paused, pen resting gently between her fingers, and looked out through the silver blur of the downpour. A long, deep breath escaped her, as if she were releasing a memory that had clung too long to the corners of her heart. Down the hall, Prince William had just paused outside his study. His glance drifted toward the quiet wing where Edith's light no longer burned. He couldn't have known then how deeply her quiet presence had reshaped the palace, how a woman with no title, no headlines, had left something lasting. It began, as most turns of fate do, without warning. A rainy Tuesday morning, a misstep on the narrow stone stairs to the laundry room. One loose tread, a blink of distraction, and she was on the floor, conscious but clutching her side. Refusing the fuss of an ambulance, she brushed off concern with the familiar phrase, "I'm all right, truly." But by noon, William was informed. By evening, a private physician had been called, and strict order for complete rest were quietly put in place. Then, she disappeared. Not vanished, not lost, but removed from the daily rhythm of palace life. The napkins went unfolded. The dining room held flowers long past their prime. Her absence was a silence too loud to name. The press caught wind quickly, as they always do, printing speculative headlines. "Where's the royal maid?" "Prince William's housekeeper disappears." The palace's response was carefully worded and brief. Edith was recovering under full medical supervision. No photos, no interviews, just quiet. Inside, the palace changed. The kitchen felt colder, footsteps more hesitant. Her room remained untouched, save for a vase of tulips on her nightstand, wilting in slow surrender. A breeze from the open window rustled her notebook now and then, the pages stirring as if expecting her to return. William never spoke of her publicly, but those close noticed the difference. His mornings started slower, his gaze more distant, the weight of unspoken things lingering in his quiet walks. Then came the moment no one saw coming. One crisp afternoon, his car was spotted outside a solicitor's office in London. He went in alone, stayed an hour, left without a word. No official explanation ever came. But behind closed doors, something was being prepared. And then, before the next dawn could rise, Edith was gone. There was no royal fanfare, no sweeping announcement, just a simple message from the palace. "We mourn the quiet passing of our dear Edith, a valued member of our household." The world barely noticed, but behind those gates, something shifted. Grief settled gently, deeply. Her funeral, expected to be small and private, was held in a quiet chapel just outside London. Yet when the black cars arrived, the world looked on. Cameras clicked, reporters whispered, stunned to see Prince William step out not as a royal, but as a mourner. He stood beside her daughter, Jane, whose hands trembled around the service program, Edith May Turner, a life of quiet grace. When William spoke, his voice was steady until it cracked. She served with dignity. She listened without judgment. She gave more than anyone ever knew. And we will miss her, not because she worked for us, but because she stood by us. In the hush that followed, something rare was felt. Not duty, not decorum, but love. And so, the palace moved forward. But it never moved on. Her notebook, still lying untouched on that desk, seemed to hum with the echo of her presence, like a voice that no longer spoke aloud, but had never truly gone quiet. But what made Edith's quiet grace echo through the palace long after she was gone? Stay glued to your screen to discover. The message left behind by Edith. The house was quiet that day, eerily so, like it had been holding its breath. After the service, Jane returned to her late mother's flat to gather what was left behind. Everything was in order. Neatly folded towels, labeled containers, drawers lined with lavender sachets. It was the kind of precision only her mother, Edith, could manage. But it wasn't just tidiness. It was preparation, like Edith had known she wouldn't be back. It was while reaching for an old sweater at the back of the wardrobe that Jane's fingers brushed against something harder than wool. Wrapped in an old scarf, hidden in shadow, was a small wooden box. Taped beneath it, barely visible, was a single brass key. That evening, Jane placed the box gently on the dining table, staring at it for hours before finally turning the key. Once, then again. A click. The lid creaked open to reveal a single envelope on top, marked in delicate handwriting, "For my family when I'm gone." Jane held her breath. Inside the box were tightly bound bundles, twine still snug around them, and each letter bore a seal Jane recognized instantly, the crest of Kensington Palace. She pulled out the first one. The date was from 5 years ago. The ink, though faded slightly, still carried the unmistakable handwriting of Prince William. "Dear Edith," it began, "thank you for your quiet advice. It steadied me more than you'll ever know. You remind me of someone I lost far too soon." Jane blinked. Another letter followed, then another. Each one spoke in the same tone, gentle, grateful, and deeply personal. They weren't royal formalities. These were confessions, reflections, moments that had never made it beyond the palace walls. "You once asked if I believed in magic," one read. "I didn't. Not until I saw the way you moved through this house." And just beneath the stack of letters, more surprises. Official documents stamped with royal seals and ornate signatures. Jane's eyes widened as she realized what they were: trust agreements, legal files, and records of transfers. One figure caught her breath: £7 million. Edith hadn't simply offered wisdom to a young prince in need. She had been entrusted quietly and without ceremony as a silent partner in a royal trust, one that funded orphanages, scholarships, hospitals. But her mother had never lived lavishly. She'd ironed school uniforms, saved biscuit tins for sewing supplies, and never once mentioned the extraordinary life she'd kept folded away like linen. And as Jane sat there, the box open between memory and disbelief, her daughter Amelia entered the room. Jane handed her a final envelope, one that simply read, "For Jane's children." When they opened it that evening, surrounded by family, the words inside were like a soft whisper across time. "I believe in quiet acts of good. With Prince William's help, I've arranged a gift. Your education is secure. The rest will care for those without families. Love doesn't have to be loud. It just has to last." There were no more words after that, just silence, and a weight that wasn't about money, but about love lived quietly, loyally, without asking for anything in return. She left behind something vast. In the quiet stillness of Kensington Palace, Prince William sat by the tall windows of his study, the late afternoon light brushing across the framed photograph on his desk, a simple image of Edith in the palace gardens, holding a rake and a teacup, her expression soft and knowing. He never spoke much about the picture, but once, when a guest noticed it, he only said, "She reminded me of the best in people." He didn't need to say more. Her presence still lingered in the palace halls, in the spaces she once moved through silently, in the corners where she folded blankets or arranged flowers with the kind of care that didn't demand attention. He would sometimes pause there, just briefly, a breath or a nod, not out of grief but in quiet reverence. Edith had never asked to be seen, yet she had always been felt. Across the city, Jane, her daughter, was learning just how deeply Edith had been woven into lives far beyond their own. A dusty wooden box hidden in a wardrobe revealed not only letters from a prince but records of trusts and gifts that had shaped lives quietly and generously. None of it had been for glory, only for good. And that was the magic. Edith had lived simply, but left behind something vast. The people who truly knew her didn't remember wealth or secrets. They remembered how she listened, how she loved without fanfare. But what do you think made Edith's quiet presence so unforgettable, touching lives beyond the palace walls? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to share your story in the comments.